Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. How y'all doing so far today? All right. My name is Cooper Quintin, a.k.a. Cyber Tiger. I'm a senior staff technologist where I've been at Electronic Frontier Foundation for the last 10 years, working on things like Privacy Badger, state-sponsored malware, street-level surveillance, threat lab project, and of course, mobile security. And how many of you in here have heard of the Electronic Frontier Foundation? Amazing. If you haven't heard of us, go check out our booth in the vendor hall afterwards. We're a nonprofit. We've been around for 35 years, and we exist based on donations from people like you. And this is my colleague on this project, oopsbagel.
Hi, I'm oopsbagel. You may remember me from such talks as Huey Louie and the Malicious UE, and I'm sure glad I wiped my phone before entering the United Kingdom. I'm here to talk about Rust, device porting, and how you can get involved in the project. I also should mention I don't work for EFF, and this definitely doesn't constitute legal advice.
So also real quick, I want to give a shout out to my co-creator on this research, Will Greenberg, who does work at EFF. He could not be here this weekend, so please give him a huge round of applause so that he can hear it on the... Thank you. So he can see it on the video afterwards. So today we're going to talk about Stingrays, also known as MC catchers or cell-side simulators. The astute or pedantic among you might know that these are technically different things, and if you want to actually me afterwards, you have to buy me a drink. For those of you who don't know how a Stingray works, essentially what it does is it pretends to be a cell tower and tricks your phone into connecting to it. Once your phone connects to it, tricks your phone into giving up its IMEI, which is the hardware ID of your phone, or the IMSI, or MZ, which is the ID associated with your SIM card. It can then also potentially do nasty things like downgrade your connection to 2G, or intercept or inject content, and other sorts of stuff. And to tell this story properly, we need to go all the way back to 2016. In 2016, some activists in Mandan, North Dakota were protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline, which was a pipeline that was going to be built across Indian reservation land and probably leak oil all over the place. They were out there and had a camp, and were out there for a few weeks. And a few of the more technically inclined among them were running MC Catcher detecting apps on their Android phones, things like Snoop Snitch, Android MC Catcher Detector. And they had seen some signs of what they thought were MC Catchers and sent them to us. We thought that this was fairly plausible because the surrounding North Dakota police departments had bought MC catchers fairly recently. And moreover, if MC catchers were being used to spy on protesters, we wanted to know about that because that would be a huge violation of civil liberties. So I flew down to North Dakota and spent a week at the camp. I armed a couple of Android phones with MC Catcher detecting apps. I brought a couple of software-defined radios tuned to look at 2G networks and the sort of band there. And after spending a few days there and looking at the results, what I figured out was I had no idea what I was doing. The apps gave me results which were best described as maybe patchy. They were hard to understand. It was hard to interpret whether these were actually signs of MC catchers or just the phone network being weird. And the software-defined radios I had brought to record 2G band recorded nothing because, of course, there were no 2G networks in that area. All the networks there were 4G, so nothing was happening. We decided that we had to get a better handle on this whole thing and do a better job. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with 3 goals. The first goal was to determine how often cell site simulators are being used. We wanted to know especially how often they're being used to surveil First Amendment protected activities. The second goal was to determine what kind of attacks modern cell site simulators were using, particularly ones that are operating natively on 4G. And third, we wanted to figure out if we could detect modern cell site simulators more reliably. So for the first question, it's fairly easy for us to answer. We can answer mostly through public records. We know foreign spies are using cell site simulators because of many reports about them being found in and around Washington, D.C. to spy on U.S. government officials. It's also pretty likely, I think, that U.S. spies are using these to spy on foreign government officials in D.C. and in other countries as well. And this makes a lot of sense. MC catchers are a really great tool for spies. We also know that cyber mercenaries like NSO Group use MC catchers as well. There was a really excellent report from Amnesty International in 2020 about a Moroccan dissident who had a MC catcher used to install the Pegasus malware from NSO Group on his phone. So these are used in a lot of international contexts. But here at home, We know that law enforcement has them. ICE and DHS own dozens of cell site simulators, and we know, thanks to ACLU public reporting, that they use them hundreds of times per year. Yeah, boo ICE. Local law enforcement also uses these to a greater or lesser degree. Oakland, California, where I'm from, has reported that they only used their MC Catcher 3 times in 2016 and 2017, respectively. But a few hours down the road in San Bernardino, their law enforcement used their cell site simulator 231 times in 2017. And their neighboring suburb, Fontana, California, used theirs more than 300 times between 2022 and 2023. We know this last fact thanks to a sales flyer published by Jacobs Technologies that's now ended up on Document Cloud. And they've purchased 3 cell-site simulators just in the last couple of years. So it's unclear whether there's a judge there that just really likes giving out warrants for cell-site simulators, or if they're just using it every day for fun without a warrant. But we know that law enforcement all over the US has cell-site simulators. This map comes from our Atlas of Surveillance project, where we've collected the surveillance tools used by police all over the country. And each of these yellow stars represents a law enforcement agency that has acquired a cell-site simulator. So you can see that in basically every major metropolitan area in the US, there are at least one, if not multiple, cell-site simulators. So if you live in one of these towns, we hope that the project we're going to talk about will be useful to you. Cell site simulators are also used for scams. You may remember this story in 2023. A woman was driving around Paris, got pulled over, and the cops saw what they thought was a bomb in the back of her car. They called out the bomb squad, and the bomb squad took a look in the back of her car and called out the IT department. And the IT department came out and took a look and figured out that she was running an IMSI catcher in her car. She had been paid to drive around with an IMSI catcher that was sending out SMS messages from the French health ministry trying to scam people out of their, French health insurance money or something. I'm not clear on the details. But these are used by criminals, and 2G, the version specifically, is very useful for SMS scams. Next, we wanted to answer, how do 4G native cell site simulators work? We had a pretty good idea of how 2G cell site simulators worked. In 2G, the phone was required to authenticate itself to the network. You had to prove you were a real subscriber and paying the money. This is the most important thing. But the network was never required to authenticate itself to the phone. So anybody could show up and say, hey, I'm a network, and the phone would happily route calls, SMS messages, and whatever else through them. 4G sort of fixed this. In 4G, the network does have to authenticate itself to the phone, as well as the phone authenticating itself to the tower. But there are still a lot of vulnerabilities in 4G. My colleague at the time, Yamna, and I spent about a year reading through all of the academic literature and came up with what we thought were the most likely attacks being used by 4G native IMSI catchers. Yamna wrote this really excellent white paper called Gotta Catch 'Em All, which goes into depth about how 4G cell site simulators probably work. I'm not going to go into detail on that here. You can read it online. But the essence of it is that even though the phone authenticates to the network now, there are still dozens of messages that get sent, received, and trusted before authentication ever happens, or without authentication ever happening. And this is the vast majority of LTE attacks happen in this weak spot. So here's a little fun network diagram, which are always fun in presentations. This is the physical layer at the bottom, which handles like frame synchronization and timing. And then the radio resource control layer, which has system information blocks or SIB packets. These contain things like the ID of the network you're connected to, how to connect to the network further, what sort of timing you should use, connection requests, things like that. And then there's the network non-access stratum layer, or the NAS. And the NAS contains things like your attach request, your authentication, your identity request, handling your temporary ID, and so forth. And in the RRC and NAS layer, all of these messages are the ones that get sent before authentication ever happens. So this is where you can do all sorts of nasty stuff while not being a legitimate part of the phone company. And I hear you thinking, doesn't 5G fix this problem, though? I thought 5G solved the whole thing. No, not really. The problem is that a lot of countries still don't have 5G, and even a lot of places in the US still don't have 5G coverage. Moreover, a lot of people have older phones that don't support 5G. But even in cases where people do have phones and networks that are 5G compatible, 5G can be jammed because at the end of the day, it's a radio protocol. And if we shut down 5G, it's easy to get people to connect to 4G. In some cases, it can also just be turned off. This slide comes from a company called Group 2000 that has a product called Lima 5G Cell Pro that they will install in the phone company's network center and then give cops an app with which they can geofence a specific area, hit a button, and turn off 5G for that entire area, downgrading everybody in the area to 4G, 3G, 2G, or whatever the MC catcher is running. So no, 5G isn't the solution. What did I do? Oh, God. Okay. Then we wanted to look at detection methods. There were some really good previous attempts at detection. Snoop Snitch was a particularly good one. But those all focused on 2G because that was what we knew the most about. The problem with that is that 2G has been out of fashion for a while. Even L3Harris, who made the Stingray, stopped making the Stingray about 2 decades ago and had new technology that worked natively on 4G. L3Harris doesn't sell to local police anymore because they kept screwing it up. So now companies like KeyW and Jacobs Technologies have stepped in to start selling these technologies to police. And all of their Stingrays, their MC catchers, operate natively on 4G. So we wanted to figure out how we could detect natively on 4G and detect some of the attacks that Yamada and I had decided were most likely. My first attempt at this was something called Crocodile Hunter. And we called it Crocodile Hunter because Stingrays killed Steve Irwin, and we wanted to take it back for Steve. Crocodile Hunter ran on a Linux laptop running a fairly high-end software-defined radio, either at a Speed 200 or a Blade RF, a GPS dongle, and a few suspicious-looking antennas. And what it did was use the software-defined radio to emulate a cell phone and look for all of the cell towers around you and try to map them on this map. You can see the map here. It was a giant pile of C and Python, which we would use to do this. And then we would map out all the cell towers. Every little orange dot is a cell tower that I found that I thought was legitimate. According to some heuristics I had, like, does this cell tower show up in OpenCellID or the Wiggle database? Is this cell tower moving? Have we seen this cell tower in 2 different parts of the city? And each of the little black skulls is a cell tower that we found suspicious. Now, you might already see some problems with this. This is a real run I did in downtown San Francisco in 2019, and I don't think that there are actually dozens of MC catchers running around in downtown San Francisco. My heuristics weren't very great, but they were good enough for me, and this is a classic example of a UI that works for me and my stupid brain and sucks for anybody else who doesn't think the way I do and is trying to interpret this. So there were a few problems with this project. It was too expensive. No, journalists and activists, who were my target audience for this, don't want to go buy a $300 SDR. Even I don't want to go buy a $300 SDR. It was too hard to set up. You had to be the type of person that compiles Python and C programs for fun. Well, compile Python, but whatever, hit me later. I know you all are this type of people, but most journalists are not, and for good reason. Also, it was too difficult to interpret the results. You would be left thinking that there were a bunch of suspicious cell towers in downtown San Francisco, which when you looked at the data, there weren't actually any. So we went back to the drawing board. Can we do better? Yes, we can. So our next project was Rayhunter, which is what we're going to talk about today. Rayhunter runs on a $20 mobile hotspot. It's easy to install. It has a simple UI. It was written in Rust, so it's trendy and memory safe. And we named it Rayhunter because, again, we're still hunting stingrays, and also it was the only thing that wasn't trademarked. And this is our mascot, Big Yachty, because Orca is against yachts. You can go get stickers later at the EFF table. This is our web UI. You can already see that it's a lot simpler and a lot less scary. You can see any warnings that will come up. You can stop or start the capture, download a PCAP or a zip file if you've seen something suspicious to send to somebody for analysis. And it's all fairly straightforward and easy to understand. Our goals with Rayhunter are to determine in real time whether cell-site simulators are being used to surveil free speech activities, especially things like people engaging in worship, people going to protests, people getting health care, anything else you might think of. We want to get lots of people using it to determine the extent of cell-site simulator use around the country, but especially outside of the US, where laws might be different and law enforcement norms might be different. we want to get data about what exploits cell site simulators are using in the wild, and Rayhunter can actually help us do this. And most importantly, we want to clear up fear and uncertainty among activists and get more accurate threat modeling. If MC catchers aren't being used to spy on protests, that's great. Then activists only need to worry about license plate readers, facial recognition, fog data science, Celebrite, and cops being assholes. So, oopsbagel, tell us a little more about how Rayhunter works.
Yeah, thanks, Cooper. So our software reads Qualcomm DIAG protocol messages from the modem, capturing traffic between the device and the base station. We analyze those messages for indicators of cell site simulators using heuristics Cooper will talk about later, and report results to the user via the screen and that lovely web UI you just saw. All of this happens automatically once the device is turned on. All you need to do is carry the devices around while you go about your business. So under the hood, we read these unparsed DIAG frames from the dev DIAG file in user space. We take those unparsed frames and slap them in a QMDL file. As we do this, we also analyze those files for signs of a CSS and surface the results to the user. On demand, users can download those parsed frames wrapped in a GSM tap header as a PCAP file for manual or offline analysis. So what kind of hardware do we run this on? Well, we have pictures here of our two recommended devices, the Orbic and the TP-Link. And we have 3 other officially supported devices listed here too. But Rayhunter can run on almost anything with a Qualcomm modem. So what's in these devices that makes them a good fit? They have Qualcomm MDM modem packages, which are SOCs, with a digital signal processor for speaking LT and an ARM core on the same die, running open embedded Linux for management. Rayhunter runs in user space on the ARM core, a nice comfortable place for software that we're most likely familiar with. We need a few megabytes of memory to run analyzers for Rayhunter, and megabytes of drive space to store logs. The more the better in this case. It's also worth mentioning that Rayhunter doesn't directly change any settings on the DSP, although those can be configured via AT commands and MBN files. If you want to hear more about this kind of thing, come to our talk tomorrow at Hackerstown at noon, where we'll dive into more technical depth. So, we should also update this, because on the plane over here, I hacked a hotspot that was like running Linux 5, so they're still making the same mistakes, and Rayhunter will probably run on a lot of stuff for a long time. So, can all of these devices pictured here run Rayhunter? Well, let's see. Anything with a Qualcomm modem that can expose DIAG messages should be suitable. So what I see here is like Qualcomm modem. That guy in the top, though, he doesn't have a Qualcomm modem. I tried asking him for a PCAP, but he just brought me a ball, so we're going to have to work on that one. Ideally, we want something stealthy that remains operational as a hotspot. Rayhunter doesn't have to be deniable, just covert. It should pass the sniff check. If a threat to privacy goes through your bag and they see a hotspot, it should look normal. This is in contrast to like a Raspberry Pi with LT and GPS dongles and so forth. That could lead to questions you might not want to answer. And whereas our engineering time will be focused on more affordable hotspots around that $20 mark, community-led support for more expensive devices is acceptable and totally encouraged. So I'll hand it back to Cooper now, who will talk about how we actually detect these devious devices.
Thanks, Oops.
Sitting's a good idea.
So I talked a little bit earlier about how previous detection methods had a lot of false positives. And I don't blame those previous detection methods. The problem is essentially that the phone network, at the end of the day, sucks. It's a weird network, which is what you might expect from a network and protocol that was designed by a committee of 100 companies who all have competing interests. There are so many false positives, and so many times when the phone network does things that we might expect an IMSI catcher to do, like ask for your IMSI, ask for your IMEI, even when it has a perfectly good temporary identity or TIMSI. It'll do things like downgrade you, networks shut off. It's all really weird and terrible. And also, at the end of the day, what we're doing is threat hunting. For those of you who've worked in threat hunting, is it an art? Is it a science? You know well that it's both. It's somewhat detection-based, somewhat logic-based. A lot of it is vibes-based. Does this thing feel or look off? Does it feel more off than it should? Is this thing supposed to feel off? Or does this thing feel weirdly on in a way that it never does? So we've worked really hard on our heuristics for detecting IMSI catchers, and we feel like we have a pretty good grip on them now. We have 4 main categories of heuristics. The first that we look for is a 2G downgrade attack. This would be the attack used by the crimeware IMSI catchers, for example, to send SMS messages. This would also be necessary if you want to receive or intercept content, like SMS messages and phone calls. We monitor the SIB messages for downgrade attacks, and this hasn't been detected in the US yet. And that makes sense because in the US, all the 2G networks have been shut down. So if you did see this go off in the US, it'd be a pretty big red flag that something weird was going on. Unfortunately, in other countries where 2G is still a thing, this is a terrible heuristic. People are getting downgraded to 2G all the time in those countries. And so we ask users in those countries to turn this one off. Similarly is null cipher use. With this one, we check if the base station suggests using a null cipher, which essentially means there's no encryption between your phone and the tower it's connected to. This is useful in real life for things like making 911 calls when you don't have service. If you don't have service, the network doesn't have any key material for you and can't establish an encrypted context. But you still need to route the 911 call, so you need to have an unencrypted channel to do that. This is fantastic for content interception or injection, as you might imagine. And we feel like this is a pretty good one since you're unlikely to be dialing 911 from your mobile hotspot. We also have a newer one called incomplete SIB chains. So there are about 12 different system information block messages that can be sent by the tower. What we've found is that in real towers, usually 5, 6, or 7 of those tend to get sent up front by the tower. But in fake base stations, developers are lazy. And they only encode the ones that are necessary to get the phone to connect to it, usually SIBs 1, 2, and 3. So when we see that incomplete chain of SIBs, we have a fairly decent indicator that somebody has built their own base station for purposes unknown. If it's combined with other heuristics, we feel like this one is a dead heat, that something weird is going on. And finally, we have IMSI requested by the tower. So this looks for when an IMSI or IMEI is requested in NAS messages without authentication ever happening. And this one is our problem child, because like I said, requesting the IMSI or IMEI is something that happens legitimately in cell networks fairly often. But we also know that this one is the attack used by commercial IMSI catchers. So we really want to be sure to get it right. It happens for legitimate reasons sometimes if you're roaming and there are no towers in your home network. When there aren't any, your TIMSI or temporary mobile ID won't be recognized, so they'll have to ask for your IMSI to try to establish a billing and routing context. And this makes sense. Or sometimes when you attach on your first startup in a long time, your network will have forgotten your temporary subscriber ID and will ask for your ID once at the start of the connection to reestablish a temporary ID in a context. But we felt like our first approach at this, which was just to look for the IMSI being requested from the tower, was naive. A lot of times it would follow up with authentication, which would mean that unless somebody is doing something weird with SS7, which happens, the phone network is probably legitimate. So now we have a better heuristic. We look for an IMSI request, followed up by a complete lack of authentication, and then an immediate disconnect. And I call this the wallet inspector attack because it kind of reminds me of that episode of The Simpsons where Homer is going to college with those nerds, and he the snake walks up to the nerds and goes,
Wallet inspector.
I believe you'll find this to be in order.
All right. I can't believe this worked.
Hey, that's not the wallet inspector. Get back here. Get him, goons. That was a long con just to steal my wallet. Jeez. So, how do we know this all works? Well, thanks to our friends at Cape, which is a company that makes a secure mobile phone secure mobile network and a mobile phone, we have tests from an actual commercial off-the-shelf IMSI catcher. So this is a PCAP from a real IMSI catcher used by law enforcement. And here we can see one of the attacks that it uses. It sends out system information blocks with a tracking area on the right of 1 EE6. That tracking area is different from the tracking area that is used legitimately in that network around there, 3703. This tricks the phone into thinking that it has jumped to a new part of the country, maybe several miles down the road. This causes the phone to send a tracking area update request. The tracking area update request lets the tower send an identity request with the type IMSI. The phone then says, oh yes, here's my wallet. Please enjoy. The phone hands over its IMSI. The tower says score, and then kicks the phone off with this message illegal UE, indicating that the phone has been stolen. The phone then reconnects to a legitimate tower and goes upon its merry way, never the wiser. So, now that we have an actual PCAP, does Rayhunter detect a real commercial IMSI catcher? Yes, it does. So here we can see connection. This is our command line tool for analyzing PCAPs, which also runs on the device itself. And we can see, oh, you're back. Where's my wallet?
It's mine now.
Damn. Here we can see incomplete SIB chains. We got SIB 1, 2, and 3 and nothing else. And an immediate disconnect after identity request without ever an authentication handshake. So we feel pretty good about these heuristics. But have we seen anything in the wild? Have we seen anything in the field? Yes, we have. Of course we have. So this is a run that comes courtesy of our friend Zero Chaos. He might be in the room. If he's not, give him a big round of applause anyway. He wins the award for the most suspicious fucking tower I've ever seen in my life. This tower was even more suspicious than the real commercial MC catchers we found. So this is from a cruise around the Caribbean, around the Turks and Caicos Islands. And over the course of a couple of days, he got several identity requested without auth accept, and then identity requested and then disconnect without ever an auth accept. This could be a false positive. Since he's cruising around in open waters, he's going by a lot of little islands, a lot of new countries are popping up. Maybe something weird is happening. But then he lands in the port of Turks and Caicos, in the cruise port. And we get, over the course of an hour, about every 3 seconds, a request for a null cipher connection. This is the only time we've ever seen this happen in the wild. And it was weird as hell. There were also malformed SIBs in there, more identity requests, and everything else we would expect to see. I actually accused him of setting this up to be a test of Rayhunter because it was so damn suspicious. But it's real. So I really love this one, and I feel like 95% confident that this is a suspicious cell tower. We also have some results in the US. This comes from one of our Rayhunter users, Ryan. He was hanging out in downtown Chicago in early May and just hanging out in a cafe nearby his house when suddenly Rayhunter went off. We took a look at the logs, and there are dozens of requests for his identity and then a sudden disconnect without ever authentication happening over the course of about an hour. After an hour, it stopped happening and didn't happen again the rest of the day. So we feel fairly confident about this one too, about as confident as we can. We know that Chicago PD have MC catchers, and we know that ICE is operating in Chicago and also has many MC catchers. So we feel like this one is pretty high signal. But the cool thing is that we have the PCAPs. So we can actually show any LTE expert this, and they can take a look for themselves and give their own determination. Is this just the phone network being weird? I don't think so. Usually, like I said, when we see false positives, we see like 1 or maybe 2. But this is dozens in an hour. We have another cool result from the field. This is courtesy of one of our open source developers, Ali Rain. She took this reading in Penn Station, and as you can see, again in early May, over the course of about an hour, she got several identity requests and then a disconnect without authentication. About a dozen of them in Penn Station. She sent us the PCAP and we analyzed it and found this. And then she went back 2 days later and none of this happened. So we feel pretty confident that this is not just a misconfigured network node in Penn Station, which would make sense. It's a deep station. It's surrounded by a lot of concrete. There's a lot of trains going on. But we think this is most likely law enforcement, either NYPD or ICE or somebody running around there. And again, we have the PCAPs to further analyze. If we come up with better detections, if we realize one of these wasn't actually very good, we can rerun it and reanalyze these PCAPs and decide if we feel more or less confident about it. Finally, we did get a lot of results from the many protests that happened over the course of this summer, the No Kings protests and other sort of associated protests. And on analyzing those, we didn't find anything suspicious. This isn't totally surprising to me because police have a lot of other tools to spy on protesters with, like I alluded to earlier, facial recognition, license plate readers, location databases from .fog data science. So maybe protesters can upgrade their threat modeling a little bit to worry less about MC catchers and more about all those other things, at least here in the US. But we hope that activists will continue to bring Rayhunter to various protests because in an authoritarian country, things can change very quickly. And if we do start to see this happen, we want to know. We have more results as well, but they're more ambiguous, the other ones, and we're still analyzing them and trying to determine whether or not they're false positives. But we have some cool results that I've already talked about before in other talks from Roe from Embassy Row in Washington, D.C. that a friend of ours did, a MC catcher that we think we found at the Democratic National Committee that Wired went out and did, and various other cities as well. And we hope to get some from your cities too. We still have a lot to do with this project. We need to do more testing with simulated attack environments. If you want to run a fake Stingray at home, please don't. You'll make the FCC very mad. This is not legal advice, but I'm not a cop. I'm not telling you what to do. We need to do more user testing, and we need to get UI improvements. Right now, it's a lot of Rust heads working on this project, and even though it's a very pretty UI, there's probably a lot that somebody who actually understands design could do. We want more and better heuristics, with the caveat that we really want to minimize false positives. The last thing we want to do is give people the impression that there are MC catchers all over the place when there really aren't. And most importantly, we want to do a lot more international testing, and we want to support most countries around the world and all of the major ITU regions. So let's take Rayhunter global. oopsbagel, how can we do that?
Yeah. I mean, why is there even a need for more devices? Couldn't everybody just run an Orbic? Well, no. Depending on the ITU region you live in, your radio may not support local bands. That is, ITU Region 1 devices aren't meant to work in ITU Region 2, except for like a handful of bands for roaming, but you're unlikely to detect a cell site simulator with those. And even within a major region, different devices will have different support for different bands as well. So if you've ever had the experience where you're hanging out with some friends in the woods and one of you has service but the rest don't, because they have a different carrier, that's what's going on with these different bands here. So broader is definitely better in this case. And also for regulatory reasons, these radios have to be certified as not software-defined. So different products will have different applications in every region, and threats to privacy exist globally. So together, we can make Rayhunter global. And as you can see here, specifically, we're looking for a good ITU Region 3 device as like a recommended device. So if you have advice on that, any input on it, hit us up online on GitHub, and we can get to porting. And side note, if any of you know how they run telecom in Antarctica, I'm really curious. So I'd like to hear about that too. I'm sure I could email.
It's all Penguin based.
It's all Penguin based, yeah. I mean, everything's running Linux anyways, right? So I'm sure Kim Stanley Robinson knows. I haven't emailed him yet though, but maybe he'll let me know. Yeah, so I mean, like, one of the most useful ways is with device porting. The Orbic's a cool hotspot, but the kerosene-powered cheese grater with a Qualcomm modem that you already own, that's a really cool hotspot too, and you don't have to spend any money. So what is it like to port a device? Well, first, you have to root the device, and there's many methods to do this. On the next slide, which I'll skip through quickly, there are some binaries which you can take a look at to help you find a way in. And search engines are definitely your friend here. There's been lots of really good research in this space already. Many devices already have publicly discovered backdoors or vulnerabilities. And if you come to our Hackerstown talk tomorrow at noon, I'll be talking about an ODE I found to install Rayhunter on several hotspots. So once you have root, establish a persistent connection over Telnet. ADB also works, but it's more complicated and more code for us to manage. Build a version of Rayhunter for your device using the headless display mode. Check whether you're getting useful information out of dev diag. You may need to fiddle with some IOCTLs or send some AT commands to the modem to put it into LT mode if you're not getting LT RRC messages in your log files. If you're getting GSM RRC messages, this is probably what's happening. So when this is done and you've verified Rayhunter is working, add a display method for your specific device. If it has a screen, that's great. You can probably use our generic frame buffer code. If not, if it has LEDs, come up with a stealthy but informative pattern for blinking the LEDs to indicate that Rayhunter is running, has a warning, or is paused. We have some example code you can look at as well in our repo. Then you can go ahead and write installer code. We have a unified Rust binary with different modules for different devices. Implement one that will root the device, install Rayhunter, test whether Rayhunter's running, and add utilities for starting Telnet or ADB. We don't want to leave Telnet on all the time, right? Somebody on your LAN shouldn't just be able to get root on the device just after they connect. So at this point, you can open a PR, and we'll take a look at it and can have some back and forth on it. So these are the binaries. I would like to share some lessons learned from maintaining this project that I think would be helpful to other open source maintainers and developers out there. Initially, our install process was a shell script coupled with a small Rust binary written by MJG to unlock the Orbic and unlock ADB access to the Orbic. But we quickly ran into flow control and error handling problems, such as detecting whether there were none or multiple ADV devices plugged in, and we had to rely on like the output of the ADB command and like the output of LSUSB or like crawling around sysfs. This has like quickly become something unwieldy and much larger than should just be in a shell script. So our developers, Sasha and Marcus, wrote a Rust binary that implements all of the above functionality much more cleanly, and it just links to just the parts of ADB that we need, making it a pretty small binary. And this is what we use today. So initially, for people contributing, one of the largest issues was that our toolchain required GCC for the ARM target. This was available in Debian as a precompiled package, but if you were using another distribution or operating system, this GCC wasn't necessarily available in your package manager, and you would have to build from source. And this could take multiple hours, depending on the processing power of your machine. You can use tools like Cargo Cross, but those also take a long time to build the Docker container for. And yeah, you can find binaries on GitHub, but I probably don't need to explain to most of you that there are some concerns with just like running stuff you found on GitHub. So, you know, you can set up a Debian CH root. That's what I did initially, or like a virtual machine. But this is a lot of process for somebody who's looking just to contribute a small bug fix or just wants to install from source and verify they're getting the same binary we are. So this doesn't need to be necessary. And we're not doing anything GCC specific in this project. It's a pure Rust project. We're using a static, we're building a static binary. We're not linking to anything glibc specific besides libusb. So we replaced the Rust RUSB bindings for libusb with a pure Rust library called NUSB. And at this point, everything's Rust. We don't need glibc. But the final challenge was the linker. It's very common to invoke the compiler as a front end to the linker if you're linking to other C shared object files, but we're not doing this. So we were able, with a few tweaks, to be able to just use the Rust LLVM linker. This means that today, if you want to contribute to Rayhunter, you only need the tools installed by RustUp on your machine. So if you don't want to work directly with us on this project, there's still other opportunities to contribute as well. We've got a list here of like issues in upstream crates that you can fix or add enhancements to improve like both the project for us and the Rust ecosystem at large. And if you don't want to write some code, there's still other ways you can help as well.
Yeah. So if you're like me and your favorite way to program is to trick smarter people into programming for you, we still want your help. We need people who are interested in field testing this. We want to bring this to more cities in the US. We want to bring it all over the world, like I said. So if you're interested in running one of these somewhere, please let us help you get it installed, get it running. And if you want to distribute these to people that you know are all over the place, or especially in places that might be higher risk, right? We definitely want to distribute these in those places as well, so we could use your help with that. Last but not least, we of course want more help from telephony experts. The telephone network and telephone technologies are really weird, and they're hard to understand, and there are very few people who deliberately do understand it because it'll drive you insane. So we really need more help from you to help us look at these PCAPs we have, help us come up with more and better heuristics, help us minimize our false positives. And now that we've probably scared the absolute shit out of you, I want to share you some advice from my kid that I think will make you feel better. So this is my son, River. He's 6, and he's very cool. And he was asking me what my talk was about at DEF CON. And I was explaining, well, basically there's these things called Stingrays, and they're a tool that police or spies use to snoop on your phone and kind of get your secrets. And he goes, oh. And he thinks about it for a minute. And we've invented a thing to help stop that from happening and detect it when it happens. And he goes, oh. And he thinks about it for a minute, and he says, Dad, yeah, why don't you just tell those hackers to turn off their phones? Which I thought this was really good advice from a 6-year-old. He clearly understands the entire problem space. So, in conclusion, DEF CON, turn off your phones. Thank you all so much. We want to kill the myth of security rock stars here. None of us do this work alone. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. I want to thank Sang-Wook Bae and Rudy Wang at CAPE for help testing and providing a commercial MC catcher and thinking about heuristics. Matthew Garrett for originally rooting the Orbic and letting us know about it. Andy Kara, Russ Hanneman, Dragorn, Gary Miller, Yoshi Kono, Alex Gantman, Subrato Day, Alex Ross, Bradley Reeves for their advice and connections. Folks at Osmocom and QC Snooper and Snoop Snitch for paving the way on this work. Yamna for all her amazing work at EFF and elsewhere, protecting millions of people from cell site simulators. also our open source contributors.
Yeah, I specifically want to thank Untitaker, who's put in a huge amount of work on this project. Also Sasha Nora and Ali Rain, Matej Kovacic, MoveAX, and all of the FOSS contributors. We just had another one port a device like while we were getting ready for DEF CON. I would also like to personally thank Abby, definitely Ahil, Zaldera, Alex, Samar, Cody Harris, Dager, Edmund Zagels, Nathan, Q, Rachel, Sharon, Tony, and Joylene for the wallet.
And last but not least, thank you to all our EFF members for supporting this work. We couldn't have done this without your donations, without your membership, without your love and support. So thank you all so much for making this happen.
Oh.
And thanks for coming to our talk.
I'm also looking for a better job, so if any of you have any cool opportunities, hit me up over email.
Yeah, hire them.
Thank you for coming.